I started my PhD in 2008 and finished in 2012. Leon was my supervisor also, and I fitted into the invitational stream. And it was an invitation in reflection of my practice, which is architecture and everything but. So my practice sort of operates around, I guess, the fringe of architecture in the sense that it lands in interior scenography, set design, with a few sort of real projects that sort of float along on the outside. Really, when Leon approached me, he saw this project, which I completed, I think, earlier in the year, which was an apartment. I almost want to say interior decoration, but it wasn't. So my background is architecture. I studied here at RMIT and worked for Cassandra Fay Architect for a few years, and then ARM Architecture. So really, my practice, Studio Bird, started at the height of the GFC in 2008, based on a couple of amazing commissions that took me from ARM. At the same time, I was sessionally teaching here in architecture and interior design, and Leon sort of discovered what I'd been up to for a couple of years and asked me if I was keen to reflect on my practice. Didn't know what it meant. I was like, okay, that sounds great, a free PhD, I could do that. And not really thinking it through, I guess, except that I'm a fan of Leon and kind of believed that he had my best interests. And really, he sort of presented the proposal as a way of, continuing my practice, but I guess it had a more research design-based focus. And that sounded great to me. And so the first couple of PRSs, or they were called GRCs, were essentially presenting the practice and what I thought were some of the practice methodologies. And I think it took the first year for me to really sort of organise my mind what this PhD was going to be all about, what was the purpose. And it was really, I think, toward the second presentation that I sort of started to catch on that, hey, the work that I have done and I'm currently doing could be worthy of a contribution to knowledge in the sense of practice methodologies and I guess association, analysis of who else is doing work similar to me, and I thought that would benefit me personally and to my practice more than anything, just to sort of understand what's going on out in the world, what's previously happened, and so there's a series of projects since 2008 that I've completed that are on the website, but there's 100 more that the culmination of the 4 years was essentially what I called the House of Feathers. That was the name of my PhD title. And it was presented in a couple of ways. There was an interactive portal, which I'm going to show you in a sec. There was a written exegesis catalogue. I don't even know what it's called these days, but I had to type 30,000 words, which was a pain in the bum. Please start now. Don't leave it to the last minute. And also, I built something and presented something downstairs in 2012 as a way of presenting the practice live to my examiners. And this interactive platform was a way of presenting the research, and essentially it embodies, I guess, the way I practice. And I say I guess because I'm still not totally sure, because I feel that I'm sort of in the sort of emerging phase of my career still, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. But this is a way of constructing an environment that presented, I guess, this liminal behaviour that I operate in as a practitioner. And it was sort of fielded in a couple of sections, 10 liminal friends, so the architects, designers that I associate my practice with, a user's manual to this interactive platform, a transcript of an interview that I did with Ian McDougall talking about my practice, which is a really good way to understand from someone fine like himself's perspective of my work. I was, I am, I will be were my practice revelations or my research revelations. The things that sort of made me stop and shiver and think, oh, hang on, maybe this is really cool or really shit. That there's this kind of sort of ideas of where I came from, what I'm doing at the moment, and where I will go with the practice. And then finally, the behind the scenes, so the practice methodologies to the practice. So I can just quickly jump into that. So it was, so the practice to date is a series of client commission work, but also guerrilla work. So in a sense, enacting my own projects for my own interests. I am my ultimate client. And to a certain extent, I like the idea of, the unlimited sort of like possibilities when you don't have someone to really sort of respond to. And so there were a couple of projects along the way that I used as real clear testing grounds to my practice methodology. So this is kind of a summary of a couple of practice methodologies which I think are quite common, but also a couple that I think are unique to me. So these activities of going to Bunnings Warehouse and cruising the aisles and developing project schemes by almost going into the mindset of perhaps what you would when you're looking at clothes on mannequins. I would sort of like address kind of like the spaces when I see the materials. There was this idea of the protagonist, and so with the majority of projects, I build this protagonist, this pseudo kind of character to help draw through the projects. There's this hovering of Google Maps or near maps where I float across sites and engage with, I guess, sites in question for projects, but also undiscovered sites, and a lot more. There's Google trigger words, trigger images, which I think a lot of us get up to, but actually taking the time to actually understand the methodology that I go through in terms of collecting images through IT or through technology. So this is what I presented. This is the interactive portal that I presented to the 3 examiners on that big crucial day where you have to talk nonstop for an hour and it's really intense. And then answer questions for another hour, which is also really intense. But to a certain extent, I had this as my backup. So this was on a large format television. I had this design, which I'll show you in a sec, around me. And so I was just clicking through this interactive portal, which they'd all seen. This was sent to them a few weeks, or a couple of months earlier. As well as my catalogue, which basically broke down all of this into a whole bunch of text. So they sort of had a really clear idea of what I was going to talk about. But some of the crucial feedback that they gave me, as well as in the examiner's reports, was that it was my words on the day that actually supported massively my PhD research. So I guess one of the things to take into consideration is that you're being recorded, that your 1 hour worth of presentation worth of answering fielding questions actually does become a documentation part of your submission, which I, for some reason, didn't really click onto till the last minute. But I think it's a great way to feel comfortable, I guess, with how you present. And that perhaps, to a certain extent, everything needs to be in these documents, but there's all the innuendos that go into a presentation that I think become really important. Well, it was very important to my PhD submission. So on the right, sort of diagrams, trying to sort of explain how I go about collecting images. Contemplation, so I swim a lot, and this idea of spatial intelligence I managed to reference into my PhD. Hovering. So there's like 12 significant practice methodologies.
I love the cruising Bunnings one.
I still do it. That's the scary thing. Like, I can't help but go and get a sausage sizzle as well on a Sunday morning. But also handcrafting. So a lot of my practice is, physically crafting the spaces myself, and to a certain extent, the design evolves while I'm in this iterative phase. So actually, I took the time to document a couple of the projects. This was a set design project called Avery, where I constructed 2 bowerbird nests, and actually documented that process. And it's not all in this interactive portal, but actually just stopping to explain that there's a lot of testing physically in terms of like crafting. So. And a lot of decision making along the way as I craft. And that sort of happens in collaboration with all these other practice methodologies almost at the same time. So this idea of the house of feathers evolved, that everything's up in the air, everything is operating at the same time in this liminal kind of behavior. And so to a certain extent, this interactive portal was trying to sort of visualize that kind of behavior, where I could be talking about a project. So, for example, the set design project, explaining the background to the project, but then also going over and going, hey, certain liminal friends like Bruce Goff, to a certain extent, utilize similar sort of practice methodologies to what I'd used in Avery in terms of collecting materials, scavenging materials, and reusing them in his projects. And so, really, I looked at all my liminal friends or architects on the fringe, including my old boss, Cassandra Fay, Kendrick Banks Kellogg, who's an American organic architect from the same kind of world as John Lautner and Bruce Goff, John Lautner. So there's a local Peter Mueller. So there's a series of architect references, Carla Molino, where I then highlight on this bottom tabs the projects that Carla Molino's work have informed some of my projects, including this project, Hotel Otherworldly, which I did with the purpose and intent of examining my practice methodologies. So I really sort of took on this project as a self-instigation, where I secretly locked myself in a hotel room on Hilton on the Park for a weekend and installed this installation. I built this thing called the Forever Gazebo, which was my way of explaining my practice as well. So actually constructing a small sort of folly, a pavilion that is interactive in the sense that, so the whole thing sort of like opened up into an auditorium kind of space. And so I had a television just sitting here, flat screen, that had me connected to this podium where I sort of presented the work. So in a way, I was presenting within one of my designs to a certain extent. And at the very end, I asked the examiners to come up and I enclosed them in it so they could understand fully the, interior experience of the space. But it was a project that I completed quite quickly. So after submitting the document, I had 6 weeks to build this thing. And so it was really important for me not to just rely on the old print out a million A0s, stick everything up on the wall and then do a song and dance by pointing. That I really thought, for me, in terms of presenting my way, my practice, it was in a reflective lens. I had to get them inside something. Had to get my examiners, actually experiencing the space, and understanding that if everything is kind of up in the air and that this today is just a cross section, cutting through my brain, and this is, some potential avenues of understanding the work. So I could show you a bit more, but I think perhaps what might be more useful is talking about my struggles, and also how I completed an 8-year PhD in 4 years. That to a certain extent, I didn't nearly go bankrupt or get divorced, thankfully. But I kept, the entire time an optimistic lens on, and really looked to my supervisor and my second supervisor for support. I think, if anything, Michael Spooner, who was my second, and Martin Hook for a little while, and Leon as my senior supervisor were amazing, and totally relied on their feedback. So after presenting at every PRS, and to a certain extent, people didn't go off in tangents. I think it felt like it was a bit of a song and dance presenting my work every time, but every PRS I managed to get a step closer to actually understanding what the point of all this was. For 4 years, I didn't really know what I was doing. It was more just a way of explaining the work in many different lenses. I'm sure I did at some level know what I was doing, but I was maintaining my practice at the same time. I was teaching sessionally. We all do a million things at the same time, I guess. These different mats started to exist in order to sort of actually control, this lifestyle of always doing something every minute. But I think the revelation sort of occurred in year 3, maybe at the beginning of 4, that, oh, hang on, some of the stuff that I do is quite unique. And and that it's a bit similar to Bruce Goff, but it's not, or it's a bit similar to my old boss Cass, but it's not. And I think I started to then understand that if I was able to curate that in a format that was digestible, and initially I thought of it as a way of digesting it to my students, like my undergrad kids, like, you know, hey guys, this is what I do, have a go, trying having a go as well. And then I started to actually pick up that all this stuff's going to go public in a minute, you know. It's going to be presented to, you know, these 3 significant reviewers from overseas. That, you know, it is really important for me to understand that this work, its historic lineage, where I've come from to a certain extent, but also what the practice means today, and then finally the exciting bit was speculating on the future as well. So starting to, you know, map out what I want to do next and how this work, this reflection can be a way of actually, you know, archiving, but also, you know, presenting to the world what I do. So, you know, when I do a grant application, or, you know, crawl, you know, scream and yell for a client to pay their fees, and you go, hey, but look, I've got all this stuff. It's probably a really terrible way of talking about it, but so many cool things came from this as well, like unexpected things, like really starting to appreciate the work in the last couple of years as a collaborative process. So the work that I've done with Philip Adams' Ballet Lab started in like about halfway through 2010, and so I suddenly moved into scenography and set design. And not him giving me a brief, but actually working together in this collaborative fashion. And after sort of, you know, I guess realizing that this collaborative process has so many benefits, I realized, hang on, all the previous clients have been, you know, in the same sense, you know, you're working as a group to develop ideas. And so with that in mind, it opened up all these new possibilities for work outside of the typical architecture sphere. And, you know, new projects have evolved, I guess, from my sort of clear consciousness of actually wanting to work as a team. So I'm working with an industrial designer at the moment. I've worked with fashion designers, so, you know, typically with other design people. One day I'd love to work with a doctor or something, like a medical doctor, but, you know, this interdisciplinary collaborative sort of like clear consciousness sort of started to come together in 2010, which I don't think, and I think being exposed at every PRS, you know, it sort of helped me, you know, presenting my work, because typically the reviewers were not just from architecture, but from all sorts of different design backgrounds.